I don't have a lot of announcements. We have a lot of openings in the calendar, so if you have an interesting thing to present, something you would like to learn and be forced to learn it well by having to give a presentation or anything like that, let me know. I'll put it on the calendar. I think that we'll probably do another lightning talk. We did a couple of months ago, for those that weren't here, we did our first round of lightning talks. I think we did 5 or 6 talks between 5 and 10 minutes. So if you're interested in getting started speaking, but want a little lower bar than our traditional longer talks, that's a great way too. Either way, just shoot me a message on LinkedIn or on Meetup or whatever else. Talk to me in person and we'll see on the calendar. I think that's it. Steven just walked out, so I don't know if he has any announcements. If you work for a company who's hiring, raise your hand. Cool. So I guess just Salesforce and expect behavior hiring. If you are looking for a gig, talk to one of us about that. I'm not going to raise your hand if you're looking for a gig. That could be weird, but people who had their hands up before can talk to us. I think that's it. Here you go. All right.
So before we get into this, I got a quick question. Did anyone play Rocket League at all? Right. Better question. Anyone kind of feel like they're an expert at Rocket League? Or feel like they know how to do water or anything like that? Or if you do, if you know, if you love to talk to you, it's driving me freaking crazy. And I've watched every video there is online. I could not figure it out. So
I didn't know that was a
that'd be
thing.
awesome. Anyways, I'm John. And we're going to have a talk today on framework and patterns that they imply and how you can actually learn from those things. I originally thought about all kinds of different things that we could go over with this, and but it's something that we've been talking about a lot internally at our work. So I work for Salesforce, and so we kind of went over like the frameworks and like what we used and kind of like what we've learned from it, what we feel like we could do better with, and that's how this all got started. Just a little bit about me though. I'm my dad, I'm a husband. Like I said, I'm working at Salesforce. I'm on the UI team for Mobile Connect, and all kinds of cool interests. Big time chess nerd, and obviously a gamer. But that being said, we're going to get right back into it. So we're going to start this out with a little bit of a history lesson. So way back in the day, one of the hardest things in the world that anyone ever had to work with was all of these cross-browser compatibility issues. And IE was notorious for being awesome at just complying with all the standards that we had and making life a little bit easier. And everyone tried to catch up with them and keep up the par with them. No, that's not true. IE kind of sucked at us a lot.
Okay.
It absolutely drove me crazy. I've seen people like screaming at their monitor, not understanding why something wasn't working, just to find out it was some edge case that IE had introduced. And so when IE 7 and 8 finally got, laid to rest, it was almost like the biggest nerd war, like nerd parade in the world. Everyone's just like clapping, happy, and it's like, yes, we can finally get back to normal. But before we got to that point, we had to deal with this. And that's where these frameworks started to come into play. So I'm going to give you a brief history. These slides are going to be real short because I want to get back into coding more than anything else. So, like I said, back in the day, this is where we were. Everything was all JS. We didn't really have a lot of understanding about things, and I kind of was, I was lucky enough to kind of grow up to this age. So back in 95, 96, I was actually working with this, but back then it was like trying to get these texts that show up on your screen and do wild, crazy 3D little songs and dances on your screen, and we were working for school, blah, blah, blah. But it was the wild west. There wasn't a lot of investment into getting JS into a real language. No one treated it that way. But then, around 2000 or so, that all changed. And what happened was, they introduced this awesome little idea that people been playing with behind the scenes. No one really understood. So people were trying to like make requests out to servers and do things. And so one of the ways they did this was loading these sources in through frames. And so what we found was like, oh, cool, we can load this one page and make it work, and then, oh, we can make this request to this other service, and I can put an iframe there and just load it. It just works, and it executes the thing that I want. I can call it back to the parent, and then I can just make my page work, and then they introduce that as the HTML. And then out of all that, though, just about as soon as the HTML started to pick up, there was a cool concept that came out. And I don't know if it was Microsoft, I don't know the history lesson for it, so I apologize, but it was Ajax. It was one of the, probably to me, it was like the most coolest thing that I'd ever seen. And that's when JS started to become actually important for the development community. It was really cool to be able to see that transition occur. But of course, as we started developing, we started getting more interested in making the web look flashy and cool. And so you had to fumble around with knowing how the document model worked and having to deal with like, well, how the hell do you do an event listener? And that's where jQuery came from. With all that pain and suffering, everyone was like, yes, we got a really simple way to interact with the websites now, and DOM and everything else, and this just makes everything so much simpler. And so it was all the rage for all the way up until recently. jQuery was a huge thing. But then, of course, while you were doing all that, they started becoming even more involved with JS. And suddenly you got all these engineers coming in and saying like, oh, cool, I know how to write awesome design patterns. I know all about OOP, but there's no clear way of like separating my code and logic. And this is all bulky, and I'm mixing my PHP or .NET or whatever with my JS, and I want to separate this out, but how do I do it? And so tools like Backbone and all these other came into play. And the Backbone kind of, so I've listed a few of these out, so they go ahead and cut to that real quick. Don't think that this is the complete list, of course, but these are, to me, probably the biggest players. But Backbone came and introduced some really cool concepts, and it was like one of the first real true, like organized framework systems that JavaScript had, in my opinion. And it really helped developers start writing code in a very abstract way, where they were like organizing the code, and then things started to feel awesome. This is really when JS finally became an actual language that people took seriously. Before that, every time you said JS, they think, oh, you're a script king. Or, oh, you're going to show me how to animate my text on my screen? Dude, that's awesome. Show me how to do that, because I'm going to go over here and write the real stuff. But when this started happening, this is when front-end code started taking more control over how these pages loaded, and like basically the presentation layer became very important. After a few years of digging into this, you later hear about all these people complaining about, well, Backbone was awesome until we really started writing applications. And now we have this huge, humongous, event-driven madness going on. And does anyone remember Backbone 0.9 and all that stuff? Do you still work with it at all? We do. That's no joke. We do.
The very first presentation ever in JS was Backbone.
Wow.
I wonder who did it.
That's
Oh, yeah.
But like I said, I mean, Backbone was the shit. I mean, a lot of people liked it, and I still kind of like it. I think it has a lot of really good principles inside it. A lot of these frameworks do. But then, of course, how many people use React? About what I'd say. How many people still use Backbone?
There we go.
Yeah.
Now,
I tried.
I like this. Of course, like what React did was, to me, probably cornerstone, the tipping point, aside from Node.js, but I'm not getting into that yet, forever. But But React really did something that no one else before them had done, which made them such an important, awesome framework. Can anyone tell me what they think that was? Somebody, because I'm not going to move. What was it?
Shadow DOM?
No. Jesus. What are you doing now? I'm just kidding. No, but anybody else want to take a guess? What is it?
I'm gonna guess reactive data.
Nope. The thing that they did that no one else could do was they took, all right, so if you write a backbone application, you're going to have hundreds, probably sometimes, of files. You've got all these moving parts and all these views and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. What they ended up doing is what the MVC patterns had always been trying to do, but never could do it. And that's why they failed at it too. The whole like MVC, MVVM, blah, 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 blah. The whole point behind those things was trying to organize your code in a way to where things made sense. Your code was cleanly separated and whatever, and we took all this time and effort into separating HTML and CSS from all this. And then React came back in and was like, well, wait, yes, we know you want to separate the HTML, but what if we put it back in? Now, when I first heard about React and I saw that, I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. I got on Twitter and forums and was raging like, what the hell are people doing? Holy crap, do you not realize that for the past 10 years, we've been talking about how to remove HTML from our source code and how to create all these nice, elegant, safe environments for how we organize and maintain our stores. And now you're putting this shit right back in? This is like the dumbest thing that I could imagine. And someone chimed in, his name was Dan Ambronov, and he was like, well, actually, you need to give it a chance, and you're not the first to have said this. And one of the things you can do is like look at how this works, then how you build that, and then watch this video, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, I didn't know who the hell he was. I was like, whatever, kid. And so I was like, all right, I'll give it a chance. And then Salesforce, I left the company, come back, they were doing this. And when I heard they were doing it, I was like, when I left, you guys are doing Backbone. That's what I wanted to do. Now you're telling me you're doing React. So over the next month, before I started the company, started back the job, all I did was React. And the first 3 days that I did it, I absolutely felt like I was it just felt dirty. Like I just soiled myself doing this crap. It did not feel nice. Then I started getting into it and I started seeing the patterns that they were plotting. And these things, I started to realize that once you started using React in a way to where when you build these things, keep it nice and simple and clean and calm, things start looking and working good. And then suddenly it was like these really complex solutions and how we like made different views to communicate back and forth and having to keep track of like that data flow and know that the data that I've got coming in, whether something else changed it or not, like it wasn't really that big of a concern. That's when you started to realize like just how powerful that tool is. And so what it really did was it solved a problem that no framework before them had been able to solve. It brought all of the different pieces of web development back together. So you didn't have to search different files for your HTML and your JS, it was right there. B, it started incorporating really cool little design patterns of keeping things simple, like driving that home. Like the more complicated you make something, the more complicated this is going to be, the less likely it's going to actually work. The quicker that you start dissecting and extracting things out, more this application is going to start flowing and be really fast. Suddenly you've got all these little views that are 30, 40 lines long that used to be 200 or 600 lines long. You're like, shit, this is awesome. So that gives us to present day and ES6. So the other thing that all these things did that is very important is that all along the way, Developers also ran into a problem with cross-browser compatibility. Trying to do one thing in one, doesn't work in the other. jQuery came along, was like, don't worry about it, we got this. Give us a call to a method, and if you don't have to worry about what browser it is, we'll make it work. Backbone said, you know what, you're right, you guys are awesome. So we want to incorporate you into our framework. So you've got this view model system, and you've got this DOM management system. You put them together, and then it was like peanut butter and jelly. It's delicious. It's awesome. But then it got complicated. And React said, you know what, screw jQuery, you don't need it. We're going to build it into our framework. You don't have to worry about that stuff. We got this. And so it became a bee's knees. But they all just kept solving these like cross-browser compatibility issues. That's really why you needed this stuff. Because if you didn't, and you wanted to write it on your own, you're going to end up writing all this object prototypical inheritance crap that makes people's freaking minds melt because of how complicated it is to be able to do any kind of OOP designs, regardless of how awesome Adi Osmani's website is about describing these things. Has anyone ever tried those design models that he's got? No one? Are you serious? Aren't you guys like JavaScript awesome developers and stuff? Yeah, it's not that big of a deal, but if you really want to learn about OOP design in JS, I think you should check it out. I'll even open it up later, but it's probably the best site that I've read where it like gets into true design principles, but blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so that's what it was doing. That's what was important. Had all these browsers and blah, blah, blah. And then here comes ES6. And around this time was the same time that all of a sudden IE11 was the thing that was supported and everything else before it died, right? Does anyone remember when IE11 became the actual standard? No? Okay. That or are you like, do you guys hear what I'm asking?
Did we lost interest?
I just did. So,
Not in you, not in you.
So ES6 is important because what it did was it took all of this stuff that these people had been creating and writing and solving and writing optimal solutions for, and underscore became like this great awesome thing because it made complicated JS algorithms and stuff a lot more simple. And they took all the time and dedication to make sure Backbone was awesome with it, and underscore was great. But then the ES6 came around and was like, oh, thank you for showing us how to do this stuff. And we're now going to start doing this inside of JS. And so things started to change. So, and again, this is kind of where this whole concept of frameworks, why did we do them? And it's all because of the things we just talked about. Now, present day, ES6. Who knows, who's been studying about ES6 at all? Anybody? Yeah. Yes, study, use. Awesome. Excellent. Who likes ES6 compared to what it was? Yeah, that's a lot better. Very good. So there's reasons why you like ES6, and I'm 100% on your side on this. But that's what brings us to the meat of our talk. So I'm going to preference this first of all. Don't think I'm an asshole. I'm not, but I won't be. I won't sound like one, but you wanted to give me a chance to prove you wrong. But I'm also going to be honest with you. What we found, what we did, what we worked on, and why this is such an important talk for people to listen to. Frameworks, when you use them, they all come at a cost. Every single framework that you use. Aside from this list, is there something anyone wants to call out that they feel like is, when they think about implementing a framework in their system, what is one thing that stands out in your mind?
Pick the lane.
What's that?
Pick the lane. Can't change it.
You pick the lane and you can't change it. That's a really good one. Anyone else? What's that?
Bloat.
Bloat. That's the key one for me. Anyone knows what he means by bloat? So in the bloat, the thing is like these frameworks come at one cost, and that is bloatware. They introduce all these dependencies that you're now going to need that you don't really know you need, but they just kind of like basically added in their own source code, because when you install it, it's going to install these dependencies. But yeah, so some of the things that you get though that are great about frameworks is that it'll save you time for sure. That's what React does. It saves you a lot of time. That's why people invest so much into it. That's why it's a huge thing. It makes coding fun again. You feel like you have control over what you do, things you write you're proud of, and you're really excited about showing people like how awesome it is that you've designed this thing and it's working great. Browser compatibility thing is still baked right in there. You don't have to worry about checking to see if you're on IE 8 or whatever. This stuff is already built into it. Security is a bit of a debatable topic, because if anybody remembers the NPM madness that went on, it's not necessarily true. But for the most part it is, because they do a lot of good sanitization stuff. But one of the most important things out of every bit of this, there's two things that are the most important in my mind. The first one is it's extremely educational to use frameworks and understand them. The patterns and things that they apply are great, and they're really good ways of understanding like the pros and cons and the limitations of JavaScript. The other art is absolutely the patterns. The patterns that they employ are what exactly what we're working with. And once you can understand and see those things, you become a better developer, your team becomes better, and your products become better. But the cost that comes with these frameworks are probably just about as good as the pros and the benefits you get from them. Build sizes from bloat is probably the one thing that sticks out in my mind most. Joseph and I were on Mobile Connect, and just for shits and giggles, we built out this the application, and I wanted to see how big it was at one point. What was this thing? Is like 40, 50 megs, right?
Yeah, something like that.
And that is some heavy bloat. I mean, this is JavaScript, dude. We're not writing like some hardcore operating system level service that people have to depend on or read and write to anything. We're talking about front-end code. I'm like, what the hell? I know we don't have that many files. Started digging through it. It's like you expand no modules and it's like your machine crashes. It's like, God, that many dependencies? Then you dig through those and find out that they have their own sub-dependencies that have dependencies on these other dependencies and blah, 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 blah. You have like 10,000 freaking direct. Has anyone looked in their node modules folder? There's 10,000 folders in there, and I'm not exaggerating. They can be. They're ridiculous. But it all depends on how complicated your system is. And we're talking about something that, you know, was built before our time, and 7, 8 years later, it's massive. But the other thing that's important to realize that frameworks do is they hold your application hostage, React included. And this is, I'm sorry, but it's the truth. One of the horror stories, if you ever come to Salesforce or if you work there, is hearing about this transition that we had from Fuel 1 to Fuel 2. It's like people get pissed to even mention it. They don't want you to talk about it. They hate it so much that they killed Fuel 2 before it even finished and went straight to Fuel 3. It was like, just don't even think. Don't ask. It's over. That shit happened. This is what you need to use. But what they didn't realize is that they were just introducing yet one more hurdle. And so we have all these backbone things, and everybody was working with Backbone and trying their best to keep up with it. And suddenly Backbone was like, you know what, we're going to change direction on this a little bit. Sorry guys, I know this is going to be painful, but we need to introduce a new version because we found out the things that we did was sucky and they didn't work well. This newer version of Backbone is great though. It changes a lot of things, it breaks some of your stuff. I'm sorry, but you know, that's the time to it. You're going to like it. React did the exact same thing. So when I went back to Salesforce, we were on React 0.13 or something like that. And it was like awesome. So I'm getting in there and I'm learning all the ins and outs of React. And I'm like, oh, I finally get it. I can talk to anybody about React. We can have a conversation right now. You tell me a problem, I'll fix it. And then they were like, well, sorry, guy. we're going to change how React works a little bit, but it's because our framework has grown up. React has gotten a little bit more stable. We've learned our lessons, and we're going to introduce some things, and it is going to break your system. We're sorry, but we got to do it. And when you did that, it was like, well, screw this. I mean, no shit, we quit. We were like, we're not doing this. We spent a year rewriting a system that was 8 years old, trying to convert it to React, and then they did this shit. And it was like, I had to go to my manager and be like, Todd, hate to tell you this, but you know all that work that we put in place, we're going to have to create a new story. It's going to take us about, I don't know, maybe 1 to 3 months. We got to convert all those to the newer version of React if we want to stick with it. They found these issues, they're fixed, we need to do this. And he was like, nope, not going to happen. Todd left, and I got a new manager, and our vice president of the company at the time was, or president, vice president, I don't know, some title, bigger title than me, more paid, blah, blah, blah. So I went to my boss, and he's like, he's the new boss, and he's like, tell me something about yourself. So I give him a spiel about like what all I've done. I was like, oh, you know, I've been writing code and doing things since the heydays, and you know, I'm and he was like, so I'll tell you what, John. He's like, we're in a pickle here with this app. We got to make a decision how we're going to do this. He's like, so tell me what you think we should do. I said, well, Matt, I got to be honest with you. What I think we should do is redo this, and we should do this in React, and we should use the latest version, and if you let us do it, and I guarantee we'll do it right, we'll feel good about it. We know this framework very well now, and we can make it work. He was like, no, that ain't gonna happen. I was like, what? He's like, no, I want you to do it in Backbone. I was like, no, I don't want to go back to Backbone. We've already been there. It sucks, I don't want to do it. He's like, oh, you're gonna have to. I was like, well, why? Like, well, because we got to use Fuel 3. I was like, well, the other thing that was catchy, Fuel 3 died, and they moved on to Lightning Web Components, or Salesforce Lightning.
SLDS.
Sorry, SLDS. That's what it was. So that was the thing after Fuel 3. He's like, no, we got to go to Fuel 3. It's like, no. The company sent an email out. They had a big meeting. Everybody said we got to do Lightning. Why are we going to Fuel 3? He's like, well, Grandpa Boss, as I would say, said no. He said, if you're going to do anything, you're going to do it in Fuel 3. And if you don't do it in Fuel 3, find a new job. Basically. He didn't say that, but that was pretty well imposed onto that conversation. And so I left extremely defeated. And before I left, I told him, I was like, Matt, I'll do this. I will do this. I will commit to it. I'm not going to like it at all, and I will be a pain in your ass because of this. I don't agree with it. This is the wrong decision. He's like, well, let me ask you a question, John. He's like, why are you using this framework shit anyway? You know Matt, you know that's what he'll say, how he says it. And I was like, well, because, you know, frameworks are awesome and all these libraries and, you know, complexity and they solve things, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, why do you use it? I was like, well, that's a really good question. Why? Because we don't need it. He's like, exactly. He's like, but you're too interested in using a framework that you're not even thinking about that. I was like, yeah, well, you've got a point. But we wrote it in Backbone anyway, and Fuel 3, and we started that project, and it kind of got killed halfway as well. So now we're stuck with a half-transition application with React, killed that repo, went back to Fuel 0.9 dinosaur, still maintain that piece of shit. Sorry, I'm gonna cuss a little bit because that's just my MO. But then we introduced Fuel 3, and we were like, all right, awesome, we're gonna do this right. And so we started on it. And now we've got this Backbone application that's written and rewrote half of the logic for this other app. So we got two competing Backbone systems that are basically trying to marry each other. I won't say it's a nightmare because we can maintain it, but I will say it's a nightmare. It really is. So he came up to me the next time and it was like, hey, so we're going to redo this other application. I was like, let me guess, we got to do Fuel 3, right? We wanted to do backbone again. He's like, nope. He's like, you tell me what you want to do. Now that you've had a chance, tell me what you want to do. I was like, let's do it pure JS. He's like, okay. Didn't even question it. I was like, what the? Where was this? Like 10, months ago. Because I didn't offer any kind of framework, and it was just kind of nudge us in the right direction. I learned that hard way really quick, but I loved it for that. But yeah, so mental anxiety, as you can see, is like something that comes along with frameworks. And I'm telling you now, I love React. I'm not trying to shit on it, but I am being honest with you. That scenario that I just went through, and Joseph's gone through, and Steven's gone through, and just, anyone that's been with our company, know that this is the case. And that's why when you talk to people in there and you talk about adding a framework, they're going to hate you on purpose. And I'm going to help them hate you. Because it's like, dude, do you know what you're saying and what you're going to introduce? But at the same time, we didn't have any alternatives. So this is the aftermath, and this is true. This is 100% accurate. And I made sure it's accurate because I'm dug through the repositories in their system to make sure. And I know I'm missing some too, but I started to run out of room, and I was like, I just can't put 3 pages of dependencies, but these are all the different things that we bring in across all of our products. And this are all the things that we write internally. It adds on top of all this shit. And can you imagine, like, we had QE engineers who were losing their position, but they had an option to come into development. And one of them had the bright idea, well, not bright idea, because I kind of to try JavaScript as the language they wanted. And so my boss was like, you really want to teach him JavaScript? I was like, yeah, I can do it. He's like, how long do you think you need? I was like, from scratch? 2 or 3 months, he'll be ready to rock and roll. Like, you want to document this. And so I did. I started writing this big, long, quick doc about how to be a developer from someone who's never done it before. And I started thinking, well, what do I got to teach him? I was like, well, shit, he's going to have to know some of the things that we write. And that's what led me to this list. And holy God, by the time I finished that 1 page of just documenting the dependencies, I was like, Jesus, if I show him this, he's going to laugh at me and freaking leave today. And so I didn't show him the list. I was like, I don't have a document ready yet, Mike, and I'm sorry, but so we're just going to go to a conference room and figure this out. And I started going into stuff, and then started mentioning, well, there might be a library you got to learn, but this is what you end up with. It's like this kind of stuff. And while these things are great because they do amazing things, you got to remember what they do to your system and your build and your applications and your mind. They can really deteriorate things. And so that brings us to, like, the savior in my mind of this whole problem. And I'm going to put a lot of stock into this part, and I'm going to show you why. This is like the last slide, I promise. Maybe there's 3 more. But no, I'm just kidding. Probably 1 more. So, but this is what I think is probably the most underutilized thing that we have as engineers today. Is the ES6, believe it or not. And that sounds really stupid, and I'm going to hopefully convince you otherwise. And I hope that this will open your mind to why we're putting so much emphasis on this. ES6 solves so many problems, it's not even funny. One of the hardest things in JavaScript was working with strings. It's no longer really a problem now with the whole like template rule strings thing. Put a backtick in there, you're done. Joseph taught me a lot about this part that we're about to go into. And I didn't understand just how important ES6 was until he came on board with this. And I'm going to show you something we built that I'm very proud of. And I think it emphasizes all of this very well. But the key to doing anything first is understanding, right? You got to understand ES6. You have to understand what it can do and what it can't do. Why it's awesome, why ES5 sucks. It does. What ES6 does is basically reinvent JavaScript, and I'll say that any day that you want. It does it for the better and the good. But once you understand ES6, you also have to understand these frameworks because they're extremely important. Anything that you're about to adopt, you need to understand it. You need not just need to understand it, you need to breathe it and really understand it. Know its goods and bads. Know that if you do this, this is going to crash. You know, if you do that, you're going to lose your job. But then that's where the complexities come up, right? So what is the thing? How complex is React? Not. I don't mean like when you you bring React into your system. That part is easy. I already know that. You all know that. There's too many people out there talking about it to not know that. How complex is React's source code? Has anyone dug through it? When was the last time you dug through it? Yeah.
Yeah.
How awesome did you feel as an engineer when you dug through it?
I still don't do hooks for you. Okay. You asked me
how smart did you?
demoralize me.
Yes, that's what I'm asking. Why?
It's not JavaScript.
No, it's not. Holy shit, it's not. Oh my
It's
god.
not something you write for a company.
Dude, I'm talking like there are tens, maybe more like hundreds. I don't know. I could count it, and I'm the kind of guy that probably will one day. But I'd guesstimate that there are at a minimal probably about 60,000 lines of code in React. Compiled and compressed down, they claim that it's like 3.5K, I think is, or 12K. I don't remember, some ridiculous number. But they say that. But whatever, let's get back to this. Other things that you can think about with ES6. Sorry, I got ADD on you a little bit. Polyfill, all the things. So if you want to start working with ES6, realize that polyfills are your probably best sanity tool that you can use because that solves all the cross-browser compatibility things that jQuery and all these other guys started to do. Webpack is awesome. Use it. And you only really need it though until Microsoft finally puts IE 11 to bed, in which case, I swear to God, if we don't have a party, I'm going to be very mad. Because when this happens, and I'm serious, when this happens, this guy dies, you don't need this anymore. You really don't. The only thing you would need in placement of this is something to compress your files. Because your browsers will have all of this shit baked into it. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's going to happen sooner than you think. Template literals, they're my favorite thing in ES6. Oh my God. And again, I didn't realize just how much I felt that way until Joe was showing me this. I'll explain it in a minute. Remember that today, when you talk about JavaScript, JavaScript can do just about whatever you want. And the whole saying of JS can do that is kind of a thing, because that means like, well, how are you going to traverse a multi-dimensional array really quick and fast? You don't need underscore. JS kind of already does that. The ES6 already implemented the same type of algorithms that these things are giving you for optimization techniques, and it's already baked in. And prove me wrong. That's, but no, seriously, that I want you to prove me wrong. But as with anything, though, if you want to do it, you need to practice it, just like you practice React. And I know you feel probably kind of lost right now, like, what the hell is he talking about? Because we were talking about this thing, and now we're just going over this list. What I mean is, like, I want you to start thinking about, picture this. What if React didn't exist today, is what I want you to think about. What if React wasn't a thing anymore? What if Backbone died? What if all these libraries that you've been depending on died, and you just can't access them? What if GitHub, owned by Microsoft, says, we've been dying for this moment to own GitHub, because now we can destroy the open source movement. Yes. Thank you. But let's imagine if they do it. What would your life feel like? What would you do? Would you keep trying to like use this same old thing that you've got installed in your machine? Or would you try to do, well, can I rewrite it? Or can I redo this thing? And that's what I want you to think about. That's what we're about to get into. But when you do that, you need to avoid the madness. Redundancy is good. I'm pleased to say that I had to convince a lot of people that. But redundancy, in my opinion, is probably one of the nicest things about coding, because it helps like your code speak to you. When you see something redundant, you know that you need something for it, right? We're going to see that. So, Bill O'Reilly he's such a crazy asshole. Oh my God. Has anyone seen this?
It's a great movie.
Oh my God. It's beautiful even today. So what we're going to do is actually go through this. So we're going to go by just doing it, seeing it. So let's see what I mean by all this and what we're trying to get to. Does anyone know what to do MVC is? Yeah, what's up?
Can you make sure your mic's on?
My mic not on?
No, it's not.
I've been saying this entire time. You couldn't hear.
No.
That's crazy.
You can hear me from here. I'll make sure that mic's on so I can switch.
Oh, because he's about to
I was watching the live stream before I got there.
There you go.
I could hear you perfectly.
Okay, cool, awesome. So hopefully you don't hear an echo on the screen now, because if you do, blame that guy right there. You can't see him. He's in a black shirt. I'll tell you his name, tell you where he works, because he will have destroyed the stream. So, no, that's cool. But yeah, we'll do it live. So what we're going to do is to do MVC. If anybody doesn't know what it is, and or if you're new and you're still trying to learn all this stuff, I apologize. Probably went through a lot of complex stuff. Everybody else is like, this is hopefully. But to do MVC is a great way of understanding frameworks. And I told you one of the very first things I listed was understand. And you need to really understand your frameworks. And to do that, what better way to do than actually use some kind of example? To do is a very simple app. A lot of people will ask you, what should I write the first time? In my opinion, this is probably the thing I wish I could have always said to them. Write a to-do app. Because it teaches you all kinds of stuff. Storage, creating things, blah, blah, blah. Great thing about to-do the MVC, though, is that they introduced, at the time, all the different types of MVC patterns and all the frameworks that were using it. And they had some really cool people that contributed to it. Does anybody not know who Adi Osmani is? Okay, so Adi Osmani is kind of like God in a way. I would probably, like, I don't get excited. I'm almost 40, so I don't get excited when I get people, but I would probably be like, oh my God, he's Adi Osmani. He is that good. He's very intelligent guy. He's done a lot of great things for the community. Really huge name, and if you don't know who he is, look him up. I swear to God, you will learn a lot just from ADD. Oh, look it up right here. Adi Oz. Just type Adi OS, and he's like the very first thing that Google's going to suggest to you. Now I hate him. He sucks. Don't look at this guy. He doesn't know shit. But this is Adi Osmani. He's the guy that at the very beginning when I was talking about design patterns and things, this guy didn't know who he was at first when I read his book. No one really did until he started publishing something about design patterns and JavaScript. And Adi Osmani, yes, patterns. I think it's like right here. Yeah. So this thing right here is the thing I was talking about. He goes through every type of OOP design pattern that everybody takes advantage of inside of their languages like C and things like, and any kind of language that supports OOPs, not C, but C#, stuff like that. I don't know. Does C support OOP now? I don't know. I'm ADD in again. But these are all the different design patterns showing you how to do it in JS. The only thing that sucks is this hasn't been updated in a few years. And so he's going to be showing you how to do it using the whole object prototypical inheritance crap. And it will confuse the hell out of you. But if you read it and try to learn it, you will learn more about how to like actively support and manage JavaScript than anything else. That said, get back to this 2D MVC. 2D MVC shows you different frameworks. You go to the examples page. Here's all the different frameworks that they support. And so if you're interested in learning how to do Backbone or React or whatever, Addie is one of the people that contributed to the backbone example, just to give you an idea of the level of like intelligence that some of these things, not all of them, have in them. But there's some really big name people that actually contributed to this list because they believe that this is a really good way of doing it as well. So I encourage everyone to look through this. But what we're going to do today is we're going to take a backbone and a React to do MVC. And we're going to take out backbone and React and just do it with JS. And what I'm going to show you not only is just how to do it with raw JS, but how to like learn the patterns that they apply, and off of those patterns that you've just now taught yourself, how to apply it yourself without having to import any kind of these dependencies. And there's another topic I wish I'd covered. I probably will at the very, very end. So let's go ahead and get started, and let's do some code. How long have I gone so far? Shit. I meant to talk for 15 minutes and I got carried away. I'm so sorry, guys and girls. All right, cool. Sorry. Awesome. Thanks. So, yeah. So over here on the right is Backbone. Anyone, if you know Backbone, awesome. If you don't, I'm sorry. And I'm also happy, but I'm sorry. Backbone, this was what I, like I said, used to love and adore. And what it does in this application is Backbone is all about structure, right? It's all about separation of views, controllers, and models. Models are your data, views are your presentation, and controllers are the things that are kind of like tying them together, right? It's the guy that's like making the requests for things or instantiating a model and then managing it and blah, 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 right? So the first thing that they show you, though, is a Backbone view. And what they do is they go ahead and go through here, and you have this setup routine that you got to go through, right? So what is introducing you is like a configuration management model where you're configuring an object and basically like populating with some information, and then all of a sudden magic happens and shit just renders, and it's like, oh, this is great. You know, I don't have to think about how to structure these things. And you've got this L, which is your element, the thing that it's going to dive into and apply everything into. So it's basically a selector. It's going to look for a class name called to-do app. And this is where all of your like view logic is going to start getting populated and rendered inside of. And then you've got this template, which is a handlebars thing, or underscore template, sorry. But anybody know what not know what templates are in any language? So I don't need to explain what a template is. Awesome. So this is where we're loading our HTML, and this is going to have dynamic variables inside of it that are going to be replaced. And then this is your event management. So this is a really clean, cool way. I love this part of their Backbone, and I'll show you why in a minute. But what you do is you basically define like your selector, right? Oops, sorry, your selector. And then you define the action that you want, okay? And so you're saying on key press, what I want you to do is execute this method. And which key press are you talking about? So it's going to listen onto an element with this class name on it. So anytime you press a key and you're on this element, which is going to be an input box, it's going to call this method on every single key press, right? So it's pretty cool. It's a really cool, quick way of doing like attaching events. And this is something that Backbone taught us, was like, hey, event management does suck, but here's an easy way to do it. And that's one of the reasons why people like Backbone. Then you got your initializer that sets up all these variables and properties inside of the object. You got to listen to, which means like anytime there's a change to a model, so anytime we manipulate the data, it's going to fire off one of these callbacks, which is an action, which makes this flow really cool because it's like, oh man, it's like I can just edit the model and then all of a sudden this thing re-renders. It's great, you know? And so we're starting to see a small little pattern here where it's like callbacks. Callbacks are happening everywhere, and they're all based off this type of event that occurs. And one flip of the coin, it's like the model changes and then a thing renders. Or a person interacts with an element and all of a sudden a callback executes and we do something with it. And then you've got this method called render. And the way they name these things is awesome because it just makes sense. Render, shit, that means it's going to render the app. I get that. And so their naming conventions were really good. And these are all like things that you need to pay attention to when you use these things. It's like, why does this framework feel so easy? It's probably because they did a very good job about explaining what their methods are or these things you're about to interact with. And then you've got all these other methods. You can figure it out. And so I looked at this. It was like, how do we convert this? And so what I did was, hang on. Oh, I got to refactor this a little. Hang on. I'll find it. ES6 is better, I promise. And I'm just kidding. This isn't my code. This is actually React. This is like 8 of their files. It's over 5,000 lines, just 8 files. That's with me deleting comments that were like this big. I saw one comment in here that looked like something from Star Trek. I'm not joking. Hang on, I'll show you, because we got time now. Look at that. It sticks out like a sore thumb. You'll see it like with me scrolling really fast. Where's it at? Okay, maybe you won't see it with me scrolling really fast. It's in there. It's a diagram model. Here it is. Hey! Told you. This thing is ridiculous. Doesn't it look like a circuit board gone wrong? I mean, and they're explaining how something works. And you guys are like, or you guys and gals, and me, myself, we're just blindly bringing this stuff in. And I'm not saying that React isn't great. It is amazing, but you got to know what it's doing to you. You got to know how this magic occurs, and it ain't easy. They got to support millions of people using this. So yeah, it's going to be complicated, but they do all this stuff. So blah, blah, blah. I was only kidding, so let's leave that. I added that at the last second. I thought it'd be cool. So what I did was I looked at that first view, and I said, okay, so this is a view. And I thought, oh, before I did anything, I had to set up an environment. I didn't want to use the one that they gave me. And so what I did was I took some snippet from Joseph Chan, who did some really cool stuff with a repo that we had. And I broke it out, and I massaged it a little, and what it turned out into was just a Node.js boilerplate. So this is just a really quick way of like spinning up a Node environment. There's nothing to it. It's really dead simple. Starts a server, has a service that you can create a route to, you're done. And that's all I wanted. So that's where I started, was creating just a basic server that I could host in a Node environment. But then when I got it, I was like, okay, so we need to split this out. And I started remembering like the things that we were just talking about. I was like, well, render was a thing, so we want a render method, because that sounds familiar from Backbone. And we need a model. And I guess I'm going to store that model, because back in the to-do MVC, they stored it in local storage. So I stored this into a flat file here in the data folder called to-dos, right? And we can just go ahead and delete all this stuff and show you that it works. And then I was like, okay, cool. So I started writing it out. I found like the selectors, first of all. Actually, no, first I found the HTML. And so I split that out, and I started thinking about how to actually bring this in. And I have to zoom through this. How much time do we have? Like a minute? Half an hour more? Okay, cool, I can slow down. Sorry, now I can start explaining. So I felt like I was micromanaging on you. So what I started doing was trying to figure out first, what's their entry point, right? So I was like, oh, that's right. So they use templates, right? So the first thing I did was say, okay, well, where's that first template? Like, cool, there's template, HTML, stats, HTML, what is this? So I searched for it, and I was like, okay, so there's finally, found my HTML. This is like their entry source, okay? And so I was like, cool, so I don't need to worry about all of this yet. So I'm gonna delete that. And I don't need to worry about all these script tags, because I'm not bringing any of that shit in. And so the only thing I was left with was HTML. I was like, cool, so now I need to build like some HTML. And so that's what we did. I can dig through it real quick, real simple. So this is basically the model for your HTML container. Doesn't do anything magical at all. Like, actually, it's kind of lame and kind of scary and boring. But all it does is create a little body container. I'm actually going to do this because we don't need it. Maybe you do. No, we don't. So I was like, cool. So what's the first thing that it gets into? We got a to-do app. That's the thing that we saw as a selector. Cool. That's my starting point, right? So this is my main container. So I brought it in, and I was like, cool. Where am I going to put it at? I was like, well, at first, this thing doesn't have any kind of identifier, so I added one, and I actually ended up calling it like, so right here is the to-do thing. Right? So I just brought this code in, which are just containers, empty containers that don't do anything. I added an identifier in there, though, because I want to be able to select it and find it really quick and just type group second. And so I said, you know what? And this is where I started. This is the first file I created. And I was like, cool. So I'm just going to create a new app view. And new app view. Okay, so we create new backbone models. I'll make this an object too. So I'll just name it app view. And I want to tell it what the selector is. That's all we do. Just use pure.js to do this. This is really simple. MDN is your friend. But you will see a lot of raw JS. You might barf about it. And that's cool. I did too. But it really isn't that bad because you only have a handful of raw JS methods that will manipulate the DOM that you have to deal with anymore. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And so this gives me my element, and so I pass it in, and then off we go. And so I created a small little view. And what it does is I started looking back again at the backbone model, and I was like, so how are they referencing things? And I started here at the top. I was like, okay, so I got an element. I need an element. I've got a template, but I don't need a template because I'm going to put that inside of my JS. So I'm just going to skip past that. I've got these events that I have to worry about. Don't care about that. It's too early. I've got all these selectors. I don't care. Jesus. And oh, cool. Finally, they're fetching something. So I looked at how they fetched. So I had to dig into the model and figure out how they were structuring it and the things that it was going to require. And so I started stripping this out and abstracting it away. And I was like, cool, that's going to help me define my actual data model that I'm going to implement into this thing. And so when I do that, I was like, cool, so I need to get some data. So I said, you know what, let's just create a simple little action. And all it's going to do is fetch data. And I'm going to define that same model structure here. And that's how I did it. I didn't have to use backbone model, but it's basically the same structure you would do for default of a model, right? And so I was like, cool. So one of the methods they use is create to-do and fetch to-dos, right? Fetch to-dos is the first thing. And so I wrote a little thing. I brought in isomorphic fetch, which is like a polyfill for making fetches inside of JS. You don't have to worry about creating this huge, humongous, like XHTML object that handles like asynchronous, building the async request and blah, 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 all that's handled. And all you do is a simple fetch. And you provide the URL to it, and you're done. It gets data, you do something with it, you move on. So all this does is open this file, reads in the data, pulls it back to this method. This method tears it apart and applies these defaults to it, and then, you know, we're done. But actually, it doesn't even do that. This thing does. But so yeah, all this thing does is just return to you what you have for data. So like, cool, so now I can get my data. So I fetched to-dos, and I was like, cool, so what do they do? When they get done fetching, what is it they do, right? So I look back and I remember, oh yeah, this is just callbacks, right? Callback hell is like they would call it. And they're resetting it. Like, so that means that they're starting over from scratch. Well, I don't want to do that. I just want my data to come back, and I just want to use whatever comes back. That's what you expect. Query a database, you don't expect to have to like clear everything out. You just want to get the result set, right? And so we just fetch and say, okay, whatever you give me, that's the source of truth. So once it finishes, I was like, oh, well, shit. Well, what happens after it finishes? It fetches. This is where they're doing the listen to. So we've got an add event. We've got a reset event. This is the reset here. And it does this add all. And then we also have this all event. No matter what you do this thing too. And in this case, they're rendering. I was like, cool. So we fetch and then we render. Awesome. All this stuff doesn't matter because it's just logic. These things I don't have to cover because they explain themselves, right? But what matters is like, what else happens? There's no HTML in here. There's nothing going on. Well, there is actually. They're just throwing it inside of this thing. So when it renders, it's populating the footer, maybe, if there's any to-dos left. And it also hides or shows something. So I was like, cool. So this gave me a pattern, an understanding of what I needed my thing to do. That's all I did is just start going through it. Like, cool. So if I've got any to-dos, just like the thing here, they're looking at the link. I just say has to-dos. Decide to show it, populate the data inside of it, move on. Right? And this is dead simple. There's no magic to this. There's some other views that they've got going on. These are here, right? And I'm going to breeze through this. I'm not going to dive too much because I've already sucked up enough of your time, and I'm sorry. But this is the best I can do for now. If you're interested in it, though, it's out on my repo and you can check it out. But for now, just trust me that I'm not showing you anything that's not there. There's no hidden bells or whistles. And you got to look at this too. There's 73 lines of code in here. This thing is 131. And it does exactly the same thing. The only thing that's not there is I didn't wire up all the events. I only wired up like an event, which is the key up event. They do key down or key press, I do key up. It's like when I let go of the button, that's when I want you to do something, right? That's something you learn from iOS, Objective-C, iOS development, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so the only thing I'm listening for is like when I key up on it, and the key up event type that I'm listening for is enter. So when I hit enter inside of the new to-do, I want it to create something, right? And so in JavaScript, again, this is the verbosity, like barfing stuff I was telling you about, where you got to type it out. God help me, I have to write some code here. No, I'm not. I'm just trying to be funny, but it's add event listener, telling it what you listen for, and then you do something, right? In this case, we're just saying if they have data, do something with it. We want to create a to-do, and this is where it'll kick off that routine inside of that other action, that other method inside that action folder I was showing you, which is create to-do. So when they hit enter, it's going to call this method, save the data to the file that's out on the file system, and then you're done. So that's what we do. We pass in data, writes to the file, and then when it's complete, I call render. Okay, cool. I added the to-do re-render, right? Because that's what we want to do in React. We want to always re-render. We found out that that's a really good pattern to incorporate. So we just brought that other pattern into this. Not to mention, it is still a pattern in React. I mean, Backbone. When you do the on creator, new to-do, on create, press, blah, 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 they're actually just clearing out that value, but then they also eventually call render. And it basically just renders itself. So cool. So that was a really quick, easy dive into Backbone. And we pulled out some of the things that we liked about it. The separation of the model data, the separation of your actions, knowing how to do event management, why it sucks doing it this way, and why Backbone is still, me, king of event management, even though they do really bad things with it. But yeah, so we learned a little bit from that, but we also learned that recreating it's easy, and it's not hard. This is really easy stuff, in my opinion. So then we go into React. And if you look at Backbone's files here, let me go ahead and expand them all. There's quite a few. Backbone is notorious for having file-heavy systems. So when I say you've got thousands of files in a Backbone app, you literally are going to have thousands of them the bigger your app gets. Then you get to React, and I think they did this on purpose. If I expand React.js folder, like, ta-da! Told you, shit's easy. They have like 6 files in here. Like, well, what's in these 6 files? So I start digging through it, and I'm like, God, that's 185 lines. That's not very Reactful. And I look at footer, and I'm like, 62, you're getting closer, dude. And then I get to this 108. Man, so what you guys did was you just crammed all this shit in here together, And it was like, see, 6 files, but really you should probably had 9. But it's cool because it's still React and it all flows really nice and neat, and things are still like not event driven anymore. They're more like action event, like real world driven is one of the things that I guess you could say about React. And so I was like, cool, so let's figure out how we're going to do this. And this introduces the thing that I wanted to show you, and I can't wait to show you, because this is what we worked on. Internally, we had the same problem. We wanted to build something with pure.js, and we all kind of like React. And I was like, well, if we're going to do this in React, not React, if we're going to do this in pure.js, what are we going to do? And so at first I started building this stuff. Joe came in and was like, no, throw it away. Let's rethink about this. I was like, cool. And so the way that we designed, before I show you this, I want to explain to you how we got this thing I'm about to show you, which is really cool. What we did was we said, how are we going to build our app? And the way that we decided to build it was like this. First of all, started with just blank HTML, nothing to it. And all we do is set up something that when we load the page, we see, we see something back. We see the thing that we want as an end result. And then out of that, we need to be able to interact with it. So then when we start needing to introduce things, we add it to it. So we started adding this in there. And then we said, if we see things, so if we create a solution for one thing and then we have to do it again, and we write the same code, that's okay. We want to do that. We want to create that redundancy. We want to see the same exact logic all over the place, because then we know that we need something that simplifies that. And if we try to solve these problems too early in our design, then we're going to create a very complicated architectural system that we, at first, at the very beginning, thought was great, but later found out that doesn't scale or it doesn't meet some XYZ criteria, and you end up like band-aiding it or writing these spaghetti code solutions that end up just overcomplicating it and ruins this great idea you had at first. And so we did the reverse. Start with something simple. Build it. Let the code and the application tell you what you need. And then when we got to a point where it started getting complicated, we're like, well, shit, we're at a crossroad. How do we manage this stuff? It's like, well, we could do it this way. We could do it that way. One of the ways we wanted to do it was like React did. And that's where this thing came into play. And so we said, okay, before we do React, let's just try to start with a basic component. And so we wanted to not think about React. We want to think about just like listening to the DOM and working with it. And at first that was okay, but then it got a little, like our code started getting more complicated. I was like, well, fine, let's try React. And so I said, well, excuse me. He said, well, what is it that React does? How does it work? And I asked the question, and this guy answered, have you gone through their code lately? And I tell you what, if you try to reverse engineer React code today, you will not do it. And I don't know if they did it on purpose or what, but it is a freaking like spread out all to hell place. But I remembered when I learned React, one of the things that I watched was a video by Dan Abramoff. And he was explaining how to do Redux. And during Redux's video, he also explains to you how React works. And he actually recreates React in a very simple way right on that video for you and shows you how to do it. It's like, if you want to recreate how React works, this is all you need. And he shows you all the pieces. I was like, cool. And so I went through his code and started watching it, started understanding how it worked. And then I wanted to make sense of React. And I said, well, React used to be not that big of a deal. So I looked back in history on their code. And so I found some pretty cool, interesting things. Where is it? GitHub? No, it's not in here. Well, anyways, there's like a commit that you can get to update this code with it. That'll show you some of the more complicated parts of this, but it's stupid simple now. Like 4 years ago, if you look at that code, oh man, it's readable. You can actually decipher it, you understand what it does, and you can actually adopt a lot of their patterns, and that's what we did. We didn't take their code, but we took the patterns that they were applying. And one of those things, like I told you earlier, is the events. Like event management sucks. And so what we said was like, well, Backbone's events were awesome, right? Really simple to attach an event that way. And so that's what we did. And then this whole like get state, set state, all these things that you know about React are in here. So when you write your code with this, it feels like you're doing React, but you're not. You're just using the thing that you wrote. And all of your state management stuff and re-rendering when state changes, that happens. That's built right into this. And it's really stupid simple. And I won't dig through it, but trust me, it's there. And so prove it, right? So this is my container. This is the first thing that we go into. And this is how I attach my events. So remember Backbone, same thing. And look how simple that is. You don't have to write all that add listener shit that everybody really doesn't want to write because it's too verbose. It just does it. And I'm not telling you to use what I'm showing you. I'm just showing you that you can do this stuff and you don't need these things to do it for you. They're more incapable of doing it. And here's our state. We're setting up the state, the initial state. And then, cool, so what happens? So what this thing does is I ripped through all this. You already know how React works, so I don't have to explain it to you. And so I recreated it. On the render, what we want to do is load HTML. Now, the one thing you'll notice is that we're not loading, we're not using JSX. We can. You can recreate JSX. It's really easy. You can actually create a custom pragma and that goes along with Webpack, where you can define your own pragma, like a callback method that when you call the little open parentheses, and then you poop out your little XML markup, that it'll rip through it and like generate HTML. You can do that. You can also just tell it to render HTML that way. I just chose not to. It's actually more bloat than you need. But yeah, so this container goes in, sets up all this stuff, and then what we do is we build up all the different elements that we want to show, and then we call this. We just say L.html equals all that output from our component. And we look at our component, and what is it? Just a pure component. The only difference is we're not using a open parentheses here, right? Only thing that I'm doing is a backtick. This is the thing that Joe kept telling me. He's like, dude, we can do templating. And I know how we can do it. And at first he wrote this little eval thing. It was like a little bitty tiny bit of code. It was like this. And he recreated like handlebars templating system with like 14 characters of code. And I was floored. I was like, holy shit, that is magic. And we could write templating HTML templates. And then we started thinking, why the hell are we doing this? Don't we have backticks? Can't we just like show the HTML in there? Can't we do this like React's doing it? I was like, well, no, I didn't say, but we were like, yeah, sure. And so we tried it. We looked at it and we're like, damn, that does look nice. We can add our HTML back into our source code. We don't have to worry about concatenating strings all over the place. We can just like show these variables in here and you're done. And you don't need any of the stuff that I showed you before to do this. This is just built into ES6. And your code just becomes more simple. So this is a pure component structure that you can apply using the same principles and the same patterns that React is teaching you with creating pure components. Really easy. That's like the easiest thing you can do with ES6 right now is create pure components. I challenge anyone just to go home and try. Try to create a pure component without React. You can do it. I swear to God, you can. It works and it's great. So once you create this pure component, what does it do? All it does is return the HTML. It doesn't render, it doesn't do anything. All it does is return an HTML string. That's all I want it to do. I want to feed it data and it poop out the HTML result. That's it. And so that's what our container expects, that when we call it, it's HTML that's ready to be inserted into the DOM. And so we do. And so, well, how does it know to re-render, or how does it know to attach the events, right? So we created this little setter on the HTML property that says anytime you set HTML to something, so L, I kind of zoomed through that, is actually part of this component. This is a class. Let me explain that real. I swear to God, it's simple. Not simple, but it'll be quick. State component is the first thing I showed you. So what it does is create a class. It extends state component just like you would create a React component that extends React that component. And it inherits all that magic that React was giving you, right? So you have all this control over it. Component will mount, did mount, all that stuff. And so what happens is when we call .html, that's actually a custom property we created on the object that's inherited when we extend it, okay? So anytime we manipulate HTML, it's going to run this. And the thing that it does is it calls this method will render. If your component implements it, it'll execute that code, just saying, hey, we're about to do something. So if you do whatever, go for it. And then the very next thing it does is call that little crazy enter HTML thing that no one remembers and just basically inserts it straight into the DOM. And then after that, it calls that attached events thing, which attaches, because we're going to keep re-rendering, right? So we need to detach events and then reattach them so that we can listen to these new things that came in. And I think this is really cool. So this is our event manager. It's really simple. It's 24 lines of code. And it allows you to do something so simple as this. Oops. Wait for it. There it is. Is this for events? That simple. And so all that stuff and having to worry about how to handle events, you can do that in 24 lines of code. And every time we render HTML, it'll reattach those events. It'll call did render, which is, hey, component did mount. So that's the only like caveat or difference there. So we call did render, which is, hey, I've already attached the events. I've rendered the HTML on the page. I'm done. Right? So I'm not going to go into this anymore. I'm going to see people starting to fade off, and I'm sorry. So I'm probably boring you to senseless. I apologize. But this is important to understand that, like, the thing we're trying to drive home is, like, to do this kind of stuff, it doesn't take a lot of effort. It took us, how long do you think it probably took us to dissect React and figure out how to do this model, Joe? If that, right? We invest, and the company was awesome. They allowed us to do this research, and it paid off because now these 80 or freaking 30 to 40 meg builds that we had, how big are they, Joe? 3 megs. 80 megs to 3 megs. That quick, just by implementing this. And we're doing the same shit, but we don't have to bring any of these frameworks in. And I can't emphasize how important that is. And not to mention, the more important thing is, the only thing that we have to rely on are polyfills and Webpack. And as soon as IE 11 dies, we don't have to worry about that no more. And our packages, our package JSON, look at this thing. This is awesome. This is beautiful. Our package JSON is this. You know what that's made out of? The things that we need for cross-browser compatibility. And when IE 11 dies, so does that list. Think about that. I mean, holy crap. And the only thing you have to bring in now are the things you need for Node. That's a big win. I don't care who you are. I don't care how good React is. It's just not worth it, man, in my opinion. Maybe it is. Maybe it is important to you. And I don't want to take that away from you. So I'm sorry. That's a little bit mean on my part to say that. But I do mean it. What's that? Yeah, that's true. It's because why? Why is it so important not to do this? Be honest. Because you've got jobs available right now, people screaming for React devs, right? Guess what? They were screaming for Backbone devs too. They were screaming for jQuery devs, and all that shit's gone. And I'm telling you now, if you invest all of your time and effort into React, you're going to be setting yourself up for failure sooner than you think. Because I'm not the only one talking about this stuff. The very developers who created React are saying the same thing that I'm showing you right now. Matter of fact, 2014, one of their lead engineers was preaching this exact concept in 2014. And if you watch his, and I'll give you a link to it, but at the very beginning, he's talking like, you don't need frameworks. They're stupid. Don't use them. Anybody use React? Awesome. Yeah. But he goes through this whole spiel, and it's awesome. It's amazing. It's a really educational video where he talks about like frameworks and how you don't need them. How these libraries that we've been depending on are just like, they were necessary. That's what fueled our economy, was this stuff. But you don't need them anymore because it's all been solved. And the thing that people aren't doing is realizing that. Yeah, what's up? Yeah, actually, I've got a link to it right here. Oh, you know what it's called? I think, Steven, didn't we? I showed you this. Hang on. I'm going to pull something up. Hang on, before I do, I probably want to close this first. I don't want anyone to get pissed at me at work. That would be bad. I'd lose my job. All the securities are gone. Oh, wait a minute. I got to stop. Yeah, I was about to stop sharing the screen. I'll do this real quick, I promise, because we're at the end. Show you this. How do I stop sharing my screen, though? Steven, how do I stop sharing my screen? Cool. There it is. Yeah, he's right. Anyone bored to death yet? If you are, be honest with me. I'm sorry. Cool. All right, so here we go. I'm going to restart this. So this is his talk. And guess what he's talking about? Learning patterns instead of frameworks. Isn't that awesome? I thought it was. I think it is a great talk. And the thing is, seriously, it is. It's awesome. He when I pulled it up this morning, actually, I was thinking about what to talk about, aside from what I already told you. And I was thinking, well, shit, has anyone else talked about this? I started looking it up, and I found this. I was like, what the hell? That sounds a lot like the thing that I'm about to do. And I started to click it, and he starts saying the same freaking things that I already laid out. It's like, son of a... People are going to watch this and think that I stole off this guy. But I didn't. But that's how serious he is and how serious I am about why this is important. He explains to you exactly what I just did. Tells you about why you don't need these frameworks. For the very reasons that I've already outlined to you. And you've seen it. And the things that he's suggesting to you are the things you just saw. But the only catch is that at the end of the video, he starts pitching React and why you need to switch to it. He's like, you don't need frameworks. They add flow. Our library understands that. But never mind the fact that you're actually doing exactly what I told you not to think about doing. And I'm not shitting on React. It taught me more than any other framework I've ever worked with. What's up, man? Where I'm getting component from? That was the original file that we started with.
This was just a raw HTML component, right, Joe? That's what we intended it for. We were going to start listening and eavesdropping into DOM events because we wanted to know when the DOM manipulated so that we could re-render things. And we started getting down that rabbit hole and we're like, well, fuck. React already does. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that word.
React.
React does this, not React. That's not the word. Wrong 4 letters. But we were like, well, crap. But we wrote this awesome starter, so we'll just call it a component, keep it a component. So we created a stateful component. We wanted to manage state, right? So that's why we call it state component. This thing extends component. So everything is just a component. But anyways, like I said, this guy, awesome talk. You should watch it. I watched it. Was like onward developer soldier, and it was great. So, but he does. It's very funny. It felt me like if you watched it, it feels like he had someone that was looking at his presentation was like, "Oh, you work for us. But you got this framework to work for Posies. Don't be shit all over these things." He even did it in there, and he kind of does too. He doesn't get excited about it when he does it either. He just kind of starts looking defeated and starts talking. Like, so we got this rag thing. We got to bring this in. He's probably considered looking at it as but you could really feel just how much he means. Like, you don't need this stuff. Now, that's the end. Sorry, I went way over. I practiced this too to get it simple. I kind of went against my.
You're looking at your feedback. I like it better than talks to them in 10 minutes.
Cool. I appreciate that.
I think we have time for a couple of questions.
Anybody got? Hey, what's up?
I actually got an option.
Yeah.
If, this talk could be called, You Don't Need Framework. The next talk needs to be called How to Convince Your Manager.
So, yeah, good. And you know what? We had
I'm
to
right
do
here.
that. We had to do that. Before we could actually build what we talked about, we had to do that, and I can help you out with that if you
Oh,
want.
no, I've got one that.
One of the things you can encourage him to understand, though, is like, have you ever gone through a transition phase where you switch from one version of something to another?
I'm part of the reason you guys have this record.
So did you have to rewrite shit from
Oh,
ground
we
up?
went from 6, 7, and 8.
How much money did that cost your
That's
company?
what I told, that's what I told them every time.
Do you tell them that you're out sitting on us? Yeah, so let's talk.
Well, no, I convinced Exact Target to ditch IE6.
Yes! I
Because
love
I
you,
told them
man.
how much it cost.
I love you, man. Yes, IE6.
Who's talking?
Steven Rogers,
Mr.
Captain America.
Captain America
Yeah, what's up?
himself.
So I'm gonna push back on you a little bit.
Please do.
You did your Super Bowl. I think it's an interesting exercise. I would we do is if you create a homegrown
It's just
framework
back in,
that's
just
not
moved back in town.
somebody else is gonna have to take on management.
Fair question, fair point. Let me prove you wrong. So this thing, to me, this is more of a library than a framework. You know why?
So you just lost me if that's a
What do you classify as a framework?
library.
A library? Really? Why is it called a library?
It's taking a bunch of stuff, putting it in one file and sticking in a library folder.
So a library, let's distinguish this real quick. We and Steven had this discussion yesterday. Like, well, what the hell is the difference between a library and a framework, right? And so I struggled with that too, matter of fact. And I watched this video on a guy who was talking about this similar topic, and he was at OSCon. He was much older than me, thank God. But he gave a really good example of this. A library is something that does one or two things and does it really good. It doesn't impose any kind of restrictions. It doesn't impose an ideology. All it does is what you need it to do, right? And a framework is something that like influences you. It encourages you to use it. And if you go against its rules and its regulations, your ship will break. And if you don't believe me, try it. Try to go against React's policy of keeping things simple. Go against React's policy of not manipulating the DOM without going through a re-render process. Try to add an event listener that's listening for something to happen, and then start typing or dumping HTML inside of it. Maybe they solved that now, I don't know. But I'll tell you what I saw it would break quick. And that's what frameworks do. And it's that way for a purpose and a very good reason, right? Their framework defines these rules because they're very objective. And they're objective on purpose because they have decided that there is a pattern that they apply that they need you to follow in order to take full advantage of what they're providing to you as a service. And if you do that, you will see great benefit in speed, delivery, time, development. And if you go against it, we told you so, is what they basically say. And that's the difference between this. This, I can impose when at will. I can decide that I want one thing to be a stateful component, and then I can say, you know what, the rest of my app, I'm not going to use it. Let's do it right now. Say that this container used to be a state component. If I take this out, it's no longer a state component, right? And now I'm left with this thing. It's like, well, shit, my events don't work anymore. So now I have to do l.query selector input new to do. Then I have to do, what is it, dot on? Oh, wait a minute. Click is one of them, but the key press?
Click is one.
I know, I'm looking for this one. Let's do click because I'm going to probably, because I don't remember these things right off the top of my head.
On is good here.
Is it on? I thought it was.
Add event listener. Oh yeah, that's it.
Aha! Knew someone would know. Thank you. Yeah.
I don't think that's.
God, I just showed you that too.
I think that's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, well, I blame it on standing up here again with Ray, so that's why. So I do an event, and then I'm gonna say, when this happens, I wanna call this, right?
Except that's not gonna happen at the right time, like the way that this component is currently.
Well, I haven't gotten there yet. Okay. So I wrote my event manager. That's the first thing I wanted to do is take that out, right? Because we took the state component away. Now, when we go down here, I don't have .html, so it doesn't re-render. Instead, what I do is enter HTML. When that happens, then I also want to call this, so I want to attach my event to it. But before I do that, I actually want to remove any kind of event that I had on it before, right? And then after I do that, I need to call this thing, did render, right? That's what happens after we render. And that's it. There's nothing else that changed. Matter of fact, all this stuff is still there. There's nothing else that changed. And that quickly, I took that thing out. That's a library. It doesn't enforce anything. It's optional to implement. How you do it and when you do it is up to you. You don't have to use this library that you wrote to create a GUID. You can recreate that logic all day, every day if you want. We can recreate that state component just by doing this. It's that simple. The whole state management thing, I can force you to watch me rewrite set state in here and show you how that works.
From that file to this file, ultimately. You're gonna be unabstracted.
That's right. And the thing is, I don't need that library though. And as a matter of fact, it isn't that file that I'm implementing here. What am I doing? It's a pattern. All I'm doing is implementing a pattern. And all I did to make sense of that pattern was create a file that made that pattern a little bit easier to work with. And you can redundantly do that, and you can choose to use a different pattern. Hell, we do that anyway. As a matter of fact, our application, some parts use this thing, and some parts don't. Some parts just don't need it. And so that's it. So I mean, does that answer your question? Cool.
Other questions?
Any other questions?
I can keep going.
What's up?
So and for the record, I'm 100% on writing low-level JavaScript. 200%. In fact, my manager hates it. It's like, why don't you just use React? Why don't you choose like Lodash? But because I meant to pull it in, and then anyway. But so playing devil's advocate here, every time like we'll have offshore talent or interns or junior developers come in, and they'll be fine with React. They'll be fine with Node, no stuff. But then like I'll tell them, if you can, don't pull in a library. And so then they'll write a function. No, I've already written that function over here. So what you're got here is what I call special node. And so I can when I hire people say you know React, and I can prove here with a bunch of tests that you know React. I can't tell them my library that I built for my site. They know anything about it, other than having them to have a glut of just general JavaScript ability that I'm not going to get from an intern, that I may not get overseas. And so it would be a very hard sell for my manager to do that. And like he's like, well, if the interns, the people we hire, that they would take them too long.
Okay, I'll tell you this. You're not wrong.
Right.
Not at all. As a matter of fact, until I'm telling you right now, I hope we'll come back, and I'll come back here and we'll see if this is true. I bet you that it'll be maybe months at the most, maybe a year. But once IE11 dies, I bet you there's a change. I bet you there's a change in how every single company is looking at web development.
Oh, sure.
Because at that point, once you're free, oh my God, it's so beautiful to be free. But once you're free of like all these dependencies that you need for this cross-browser compatibility stuff, it changes the game.
Oh, it does change the game, but I think it also hurts a lot of the industry.
It will, for good reason.
Right. Like you can't go up for React developers.
That's why it's important to consider this. I'm not saying you need to do this. I'm not telling you that you're stupid if you don't do this. I will be very disappointed in you. It doesn't change my opinion because I think you're awesome. But that said, put a lot of stock into the thing that just came out of the blue and that has repeated over time. The same does history repeat itself? A lot of the times it does. And with frameworks, it is no different. JavaScript is flooded with thousands of frameworks. And dude, they last just as long as they're needed. And as soon as they're not needed anymore, that's where they kick drop it and then move on to the next thing that's hot and sexy and awesome, right? Just how the community works. But they do that for a reason too, is because they're adapting to what they need. And React is fulfilling a need right now. That need is clean separation of code along with still, yes, some browser compatibility things they implement. They do this thing for free. And in my opinion, React is way late to the game, unfortunately. If they'd have been in the game earlier on in the career when we were still dealing before ES6, I think React would have reshaped all of our applications in a very good way. But I don't think it's going to stand the time because it's just not necessary. Better question I would have back to you is, what is it that React does that makes you feel like you can't do on your own?
Oh, that's not, no, I'm in your camp. I'm just saying, like, I'm thinking of the conversation I had with my manager. I think the biggest thing that React gives most people is speed, getting stuff on the page, and that it lowers the requirement. So I've been in the game as long as you have.
So what you should do then, in my opinion, I'm not going to tell you what to do because then I'll probably be held accountable for it. But disclaimer on place saying that I'm not held responsible for all your pain and suffering that you do if you ever decide to do this. But if I were in your situation, different in the coin flip here at Salesforce or wherever I'm working, if I get fired today, I would say, like, if I interview someone, I would not care about what frameworks they know. And if they try to push frameworks on me as the thing that they know, and I know that I can get them for cheap, I don't think I would do it. And it's because I would say, look, I appreciate that you know React, but that is not the only language there is, and it's not actually JavaScript, as Joe would say. React is not JS. To say React is JS is just a lie. You're lying to yourself. You're also, like, probably hurting that person by not telling them that.
Was it accident for?
Yeah. And the thing is like, if that's all they know, I would hire them, because that means that when they get thrown into a situation where you got to send them to a client that's not using React, their only option and only thing that they're going to push on them is, React is awesome. You need to use it. They're going to do that because that's the thing they know.
I would say, but part of it is that for smaller companies, they don't have time and resources to let you that.
Yeah, well,
and so that's part of it. Like, I'm thinking, like, my manager would never be able to say that, even if he understood. I argue with him all the time. Like, he's like, why don't you just use? He's like, I Googled the problem, and here's a library that fixes it. It's like, no, that library is a meg and a half large.
I promise you this. Let's me and you talk for about 10 minutes after this.
Yeah, I think that would be great. You guys can keep talking. It's getting a little bit late.
So,
Thanks again, man. Appreciate
no problem. Simple things, 3 guys for getting all this going.
Great, perfect. All right, guys, if you got questions, you can hang out a little bit afterwards. Cool. Like I said, if you have presentations you want to do at future meetups, just contact us on the meetup and we'll get scheduled. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.